Yay! Good morning. Shakti here, just sniffing some ylang ylang, the scent of Eros. And we are live for day 4 of my road to Rapture. So hi for those of you who are new to me. I'm Shakti Sundari. I'm a priestess of love and sacred sexuality. I've written this book, Rapture, A Guide to Sexual and Spiritual Awakening for Women, which is based upon my own journey and of self-discovery and my journey from being a sexless single mom to a sacred sexual priestess, and everything that I learned along the way and now teach in my courses and work with women. So these lives that I'm doing every weekday for the next 3 weeks, they're about my own personal journey, so some really personal sharing. But also we'll go on to how I came to begin to write this book and the developmental stages. It was at least 6 to 8 years in the making, you know, it's not an overnight thing. The book's going on sale on October the 9th, and the 3rd round of my course that goes along with the book is launching on October the 28th. I've put some links there and I'll put some more below later on if that interests you. But let's get going because today's theme is exciting. The earth finally moved. Woo! The earth finally moved. So after living on this planet and being alive and being a woman for 28 years, the earth finally moved. Hallelujah. Let's have another sniff of ylang ylang. I'm basically doing this every day to get my sense of smell back. I had COVID and I'm still recovering, and I lost my sense of smell. This is wild orange. So both erotic scents that I'm sniffing every day along with some others to reactivate my sense of smell. So as I've kind of shared in the preceding videos before today's one, we're on day 4 today. I've recounted all about my blissful, joyful childhood, my very troubled, difficult teenage years, the fact that I became a Christian and that there was this split that then was set up within my body and my psyche, which I think is very pervasive. The split between sex and spirit, between body and mind, between right and wrong, between virgin and whore. All of these splits that are so pervasive in modern day culture and society and in a patriarchal society, and how then I was a virgin until I was 21. A good girl, an academic, you know, a Christian, trying to do her best. And then I finally had my first boyfriend, and finally had sex for the first time. And it was such a letdown. I was so disappointed. I was just like really confused, because I thought, if this is what all that censorship and control and guilting and shaming and fear and secrecy is about, like, how could that be? How could it be for something so unimpressive, right? And then I was sharing yesterday about my first marriage, and I got married very young, but that wasn't that abnormal in those days. This is 30 years ago, by the way, folks. I'm going to be 57 next Thursday. So, you know, we're talking about 30 years ago. It's a very long time ago. And actually, I just want to say something to that, because, you know, it's kind of relevant in a way. It just struck me this morning. You know, a lot of spiritual teachers and guides have been outed, as it were, for sexual abuse recently over the last 5 to 10 years. And the latest one has just come out, Deepak Chopra, right? That's what's just come out. And the story that was relayed, and there probably will be more, does pertain to an experience. I can't remember exactly, if I'm honest, so I don't want to say something that's not true, but maybe 20, maybe 25 years ago, maybe longer. And one thing that did occur to me this morning, because, you know, every morning I sit in bed at the moment and I write some notes about what I'm going to share. And it did occur to me, like, as the stuff that I've been sharing, it's very personal, it's very vulnerable. It basically lays bare my shadows, and that's something that I'm committed to because I have nothing to hide. I have nothing to hide, and I'm committed to being completely honest and transparent about myself to the best of my ability. And obviously there are still things that I am unaware of. I have shadows just like everybody else. And I that's my life's path, and that's okay. That's part of being human. But as I look back to my former self and the self that I've been speaking about, and sharing with you very vulnerably, I do see from where I'm sitting now, like, oh my God, like, I'm so different now. I've changed so much. I've learned so much. I've grown so much. There's no way I would behave that way now, having gone through all the experiences of pain and heartbreak and betrayal and betraying and suffering, and then all of the spiritual practices I've been doing to awaken my consciousness, to become more aware, to heal my wounds and traumas, and to see my shadow, So I'm a very, very different person to the one I was 30 years ago, obviously. So I'm not saying this as a plea to not acknowledge the fact that sexual abuse is always wrong, right? There's no way that can be justified, and it does need to be seen and acknowledged and brought out of the shadows, and with humility, seen in oneself how that could have happened. But just to say that we are all human. I was full of shadows. I still have my shadows. I've changed so much. I'm still changing. So it's just a little plea, I guess, to be compassionate with ourselves as well as with others. And also somebody commented in my book launch group. There's a book launch group for the book launch. There's going to be an event on the 9th when the book goes live in this Facebook group, the Rapture book launch group. Too much of a mouthful. And somebody commented on my post yesterday. I wrote a little post about infidelity as well. And, for her, she had a similar experience also 28 years ago, and was sharing how she still feels shame and guilt and self-judgment for what she did all those years ago. And as I read that, I felt such compassion, and let's obviously turn the light inwards to illuminate our shadows, of course, and be fully responsible and take ownership, of course. Forgive ourselves, forgive others if and when we can, and offer our apology when that feels that we can do it sincerely, of course. And when that has been moved through, then let's be compassionate with ourselves and understand that we're human, that we make mistakes, that we fuck up, that we are going to fuck up, that we can't be perfect and immaculate, and that's okay. And it's okay to, move through those processes and let ourselves off the hook, once we've done that process, and not live in a continual self-flagellation for our past mistakes. We were all doing the best that we could. I was doing the best that I could. I'm sure you were doing the best that you could, given the circumstances, right? This is just an ad lib off the cuff that I just felt moved to share before I go into today's sharing about the earth finally moving. So, yeah, back to 30 years ago, to my marriage, which was, as I'd shared yesterday, really not doing it for me sexually, and in other ways too. I was beginning to feel stifled, held back, restrained, constricted, and my sexual desire was not being met. And when my husband wasn't willing to do anything about that with me, I initiated finding pleasure for myself. And again, I just really want to underscore the underlying movement behind that was, there has to be more. There has to be more. This can't be it. I'm not going to live the rest of my days from like 20, well, at the time, like 26. I'm not going to live the rest of my days in this constrained situation, having boring sex. However rich I am, well, I was well off. I wasn't rich, but I was very comfortable. However safe it is, however secure this is, there has to be more to life, and there has to be more to sex than what I was experiencing. And I really didn't know what it was. So I went out, I met a guy in a bar, and he was a lovely man, really beautiful man. And I lied to him. I didn't tell him that I was married, and we had a beautiful evening together. And then, this is picking up from where I left off yesterday, we met again for a second date, and I felt so guilty. And this is interesting because I felt guilty towards him, but I think my guilt towards my husband was so strong that I repressed it all, right? And again, I'm just sharing this with you in complete transparency because I know this kind of thing goes on all the time. And it's just a plea for more self-awareness and more transparency. Looking back now, I can see that I didn't have the capacity then, but I do now. So I felt so guilty. I told this man about the fact that I was married. And do you know what? All honor to him. I wish I knew where he was so I could thank him. We lost touch. That he was beautiful. He was basically, he said, I really find you beautiful and attractive. We've had a beautiful time. You're an amazing woman, and I can't take this any further knowing that you're married. Wow. So a man of integrity, a man of real integrity. Bless him. And that was that. And I felt hurt. I felt upset. I didn't want to lose what felt very, it wasn't just a sexual thing. It was a whole thing. I'm not that shallow. And sniffing some orange. And that was the end of that. I didn't tell my husband. And again, as I share that, I feel some heaviness around my heart. I feel some grief around my heart as I share that. And I carried on looking for the pleasure that I felt was missing in my life. And carried on going clubbing, going out, going dancing, as any young woman would, right? Particularly a young woman like me who's a dancer and loves to be out there being vibrant. And yes, soon enough, I got approached by another guy who was really lovely, really interesting, really intelligent, really creative, really smart. But I was a little bit more cautious this time. I didn't find him initially attractive. And he was younger than me. I think 4 years or maybe 6 years. I can't remember exactly. I think maybe it was 4 years younger than me. And at that time in my life, and all those years ago, that seemed like quite a big deal. Like later on, I've dated guys who are 20 years younger than me and it's no deal at all. But then like 4 years younger seemed to be a big deal for some reason. But he pursued me, and there was something about being pursued that I responded to. He was very clear, very direct. He wanted me, and again, not just sexually. It was much more than that. It wasn't a pure lust situation. That wouldn't work for me. But he had this intent for me, and I really responded to that feeling of being wanted and being desired. And we went on some more dates, and our connection grew, and I found him really interesting and really attractive. Like for me, the more I feel met by somebody intellectually, creatively, in all ways, the more I find the other attractive, right? It's not ultimately about the external appearance. And we had a lot of fun. We had great conversations. We were both very interested in the arts and culture, and he was from a country in Europe and very international, and that's also a big part of my background. I grew up in Germany. I went to an international school, so international people are, that feels like something natural and aligned for me. And so our connection grew, and we did then end up finally becoming intimate sexually together. And the very first time that we were intimate together, it blew my mind. It absolutely blew my mind. I didn't know, I hadn't known, I'd never known, even though I'd read all this pornography, that my dad had had when I was a lot younger. This wasn't anything like that. I was blown away. I was completely opened. It was the most erotic, exciting, blissful, ecstatic, adventurous, creative, opening experience of my life until that point. Completely opened to ecstasy, to bliss, to a multi-orgasmic states. I had no idea that was possible, and it blew me away, and I felt like I'd finally connected with what I'd been searching for. That feeling of complete letting go into bliss, that feeling of utter orgasmic ecstasy, that feeling of being completely met in the level of my sexual desire and sexual energy, the full allowance of any expression. Everything was welcome in our lovemaking realm. It just felt like heaven to me. And it was, I would now describe that as a first sexual awakening. There were more, but that was the first one. 28, finally, the earth moved. Again and again and again and again. Like, wow. And I just knew that that's what I'd been missing. I'm just looking at my notes to see if I've missed anything out. And I left my husband. I walked out and I moved to London, got my own place in London, which is also something I'd wanted. Like, I felt very, as I said before, kind of constrained and repressed by that living in suburbia and being the commuter. Like, I was 28. To settle down into married existence at that age and then think I was going to be doing that for the rest of my life, it scared the living daylights out of me. It's not what I wanted. I moved to London, exciting, vibrant culture, arts, parties, clubs, music, dancing. That's what I wanted in my life. And he moved in with me and we lived together for the next 2 years. Very happily. We had a brilliant relationship. We had a brilliant sex life. It was amazing. So, and then again, as I look back upon that, there, of course, you can look at that and you can interpret that in a number of ways. So you can look at it and say, wow, there's the woman who betrayed her husband, and judge that. You can say, oh, there's the sex mad, horny woman who's just driven by desire. You can put that interpretation on it as well. But I'd like to go a little bit deeper than that, because I think, in reality, life and our choices and our movements and our actions are much more complex than we like to acknowledge, and things aren't black and white. They're much more complex than that, and everything is interconnected. So I'd like to offer 2 deeper interpretations of that experience in my life. So one is, and I keep coming back to this, but I think it's really important to see it. Like, I'm not sharing this for nothing. When I work with women, and part of the book and part of my course is to go back over our erotic history. because it illuminates where our wounds and our shadows and our traumas are. And the whole point of sexual and spiritual awakening is to bring the light to our behavior and to bring awareness to our sexual energy and sexuality, and to begin to move through life in sovereignty and in full responsibility. And I certainly wasn't. I had no idea. And, you know, it's not that I want to abnegate responsibility, but if you look at the sort of the context, my family, my conditioning, the patriarchal system, the religion, the culture, the whole narrative put out there that sex is shameful, sinful, separate from the rest of life, the lack of knowing and being taught or modeled how to communicate honestly and consciously. Like, you know, I read this book much later in life called Radical Honesty by Brad Blanton, and that revolutionized things for me. And he basically says, we're all liars. And he's right. We grow up being cultured, conditioned to lie. People are lying all the time. And that was how I grew up. Not to be like a nasty, mean person, but all these subtle ways in which we're not actually conveying and communicating what is true. And part of the reason why we're not doing that is this culture of shame and repression and secrecy, but also the culture of separation, so that we are so out of touch with our truth, we don't even know what it is. So that was part of my reality too. I was cut off from myself. So the unconscious social contract of marriage, the codes of behavior, what you should and shouldn't do, the contract of that, which for me, I see now very much as part of the patriarchy and part of the capitalist system. You know, it keeps us enslaved. We own each other. We become slaves to the system, and we stay in our little house and work 9 to 5, and then we die, you know. That's not the life I want. That's not the life I wanted. So we're not being honest. We're not being honest with ourselves or others about our desire. Imagine how different things would be if we were radically honest about ourselves with ourselves and about ourselves with others about our desire. And that we began to move away from this paradigm of shame, guilt, and secrecy, right? There's nothing shameful about desire. There's nothing shameful about the body. There's nothing shameful about sex. Nothing. It's beautiful. It's pure. It's innocent. But this overlay of shame, secrecy, and guilt is what creates these dysfunctions. So then we live up to roles, we live up to expectations rather than being authentic. That's what I was doing. Again, it wasn't conscious, but I was living the role. Go to school, go to university, find a man, get married, have children, work, retire, die. That's the role. I don't want that. It's not authentic. We're disconnected from ourselves, we're disconnected from one another, and we're disconnected from our true essence. Again, part of the conditioning. And in fact, totally related to what's happening in the world now, because this awakening that's happening is about letting go of all of this bullshit. In these conditions, though, we cause pain to ourselves, to others. We perpetuate the karmic cycle of suffering. It comes back, it loops around. I remember when I left my husband, one of my friend's mothers, she's a Christian and a very good woman, very beautiful woman. She said to me this one thing. She said to me, what comes around goes around. I felt judged, and fair enough, you know, fair enough. But she was right. I didn't escape. So, you know, there's that to share as well. I didn't escape the karmic cycle. So I might have, you know, had my ecstasy and had my bliss, and the earth certainly moved, and I had that beautiful experience of awakening sexually, and I'm forever grateful for that. Forever grateful. Like, hallelujah. But what comes around goes around. The other side of this, the other interpretation I want to give, ilang is the feminine I didn't know this then. I wasn't conscious of it then. Okay, it's 30 years ago. It's a long time ago. I'm not making excuses. It's just the reality. And it's the reality that many women and men are still living. But here's what I've come to know now. And here's what I see looking back in that unconscious but very strong movement towards desire that, was like an instinct. It was just this driving instinct. There has to be something more. I don't know what it is. And following that very strong primal instinct, right? Ultimately now I do see that as a movement of Shakti, of the divine feminine. Unconscious in the shadows, yes. But ultimately, what I experienced in that earth moving awakening was what I've come to know in a fuller, more holistic, more sacred perspective over the following years. That the feminine is desire. That the feminine, is eros. That the feminine is pleasure. That the feminine is sensuality. That she lives for this bliss. That her true nature is to embody erotic ecstasy. Erotic opening, heart opening, sex opening, soul opening. To surrender into that bliss is my true nature as woman. And I experienced that, and that is ultimately what this instinct in me was searching for. That. So looking back, even though, of course, it was all muddled up with my shadows and my traumas and my wounds and my conditionings that overlaid it, somewhere in that movement, there was a truth. There was a purity. There was an intelligence that was seeking the remembrance of who and what I truly am. It didn't all unfold in an instant, in that moment. Excuse me. One of the side effects of COVID is that I've also kind of got a croaky voice and it's not come back fully. Just going to have a sip of water. Right? I didn't have this full blossoming. I didn't have this full awakening into that sacred knowing or sacred remembrance in that first experience, but I was tapping into something that was true, that is true, that has been my truth ever since then, and it just began to unfurl and unfold from that moment onwards. So this is part of the feminine. It is the feminine. It is Shakti, And this is the force, this is the power that society has been so afraid of for centuries that it has attempted to repress, to shame, to control, to put down, to demonize. This force of pleasure, of eros, of ecstasy, of bliss, of sensual opening, which the feminine is the expression and embodiment of. So I was living out that split still in, embodying all of that, but then all the layers, shame, guilt, blame, self-judgment, hiding my shadows, not knowing, all of that layered on top of it. But there was this ultimate truth underneath, within. And that ultimate truth, and I keep doing this movement with my hand like a snake because Kundalini energy, Shakti energy moves like a snake or a serpent. Again, the myth of Adam and Eve, the serpent portrayed as evil, as wrong, as sinful. No, that snake of Kundalini energy is here to awaken us sexually and spiritually to the knowing of who and what we truly are. So that experience changed my expectation and my experience of sex and my sexuality forever. That was my new normal. And it just continued, for the most part, not always, but for the most part, to expand from there into more and more and more and more and more. Because There is no limit to what is possible. There is no limit to the pleasure that we are capable of. There is no limit to where we can go with this. And actually, in speaking to that, I want to just name a couple of things. It's like, one is this myth that men are hornier than women. It's a myth. Women in connection with their true nature are infinitely orgasmic, ecstatic. There is no limit to desire. There is no limit to pleasure. So it's a reversal, like pretty much all of the conditions of patriarchy. They're a reversal of the truth and the reality. So I'm sure some of you might be asking, so what made the difference, right? How come from, having those prior experiences that were like, nothing special, what made the difference? Why did the earth move this time? Yeah, and that's a really good question. So I've got some answers. So I think, well, one thing is to say that obviously I'd moved out of the environment of being the good girl Christian. So even though, of course, those beliefs and thoughts were still a part of my psyche, I'd moved away from that context as the environment in which I lived. So I felt less inhibited. I felt more free myself. But a lot of it had to do with him. He was younger than me. That wasn't relevant, but he was educated about sex and he was experienced. So he'd read, it kind of seems like an old-fashioned book now, but again, we're talking 30 years ago. He'd read a book called The Joy of Sex, which gives detailed explanations of female arousal, male arousal, positions, all the rest of it. So he'd read that, he'd had a lot of experience. He had a mother who was sexually empowered, shall we say, and liberated. And he also came from a European country, which, as I said, in Germany, where I grew up, there's a much freer attitude around the body and around sexuality. It's very repressed here in the UK. And so he didn't have that repressive conditioning. He didn't have a religious conditioning. So he was very free and at home in his body and in his sexuality. And he was educated and informed and experienced. So he brought the benefit of that to me. He was fit, he was strong, he was virile, and he was in touch with his body. He was embodied. He was a martial artist. So he was very connected with his physical body. He was very connected with his sensations. He was very connected with his energy. Again, you have to be in the body to have great sex. If you're not comfortable in, connected with your physical body, your sensations, your energy, your sexual experience is going to be limited. It's a fact. So, and he had no shame. He had no inhibitions around self-expression and around sexuality. And that encouraged, it created the space for me to join him there. He had a high libido, which matched mine. And he had a very strong, potent masculine energy. And yet he was also very sensual. And he was, it's a truism, but compassionate and in touch with his emotions. But he had a strong masculine. And he understood the art of seduction. Like, oh my God, did he understand the art of seduction? Wow. And for me, that was just bliss, because all of the boys and men that I'd explored my sexuality with until that point, they just had no clue of how to touch, how to seduce, how to arouse a woman. And of course, there's always the uniqueness of sexual chemistry between two people, and the alignment of your stars, your astrology, your energy, all of that stuff. If you believe in that, of course, there's that too. And then the one final thing was that I never asked him how or why. It was just how he was. He was able to make love for a long time without ejaculation, and or to ejaculate and then be ready to go very soon after again. So that became my normal. And I never again, well, actually never say never because it's never true, but pretty much hardly ever after that ever had an experience with a lover where it was over quickly, or where they just, they just ejaculated and it was done. That was just not my experience from then on out. I just didn't experience that. And my normal was to make love for a very long time, to make love repeated times, and keep going. And again, that speaks to the nature of the feminine, who is infinite pleasure, infinite ecstasy, infinite orgasmicness. That's available to everybody when the conditions are right and the energies are matching between the partners. So, what else do I want to say? I think those are the main reasons that the earth moved, really. It was that. So it was a lot down to what he brought, and the shifting for me away from the conditioning of my background. And I can see, looking back, that he very much led that. And so there was a sense of me still not fully owning my sexuality, or still not fully being sovereign, even though I'd gone looking for that experience. The nature of that experience was, he led us in that. But I can't tell you how grateful I am to him for that opening in me, because it connected me to something that, woke up and has never died, and has catalyzed my path ever since. And of course, there are many more layers, and I'll speak to those in the next lives. So we had 2 brilliant years together. I was really happy. My business, I was by that time self-employed. I had my own business in international marketing research and consultancy. My business was flourishing. We had amazing sex. We went, it was a beautiful, amazing time. And then he decided that he wanted to go traveling. He was 4 years younger than me, so that's totally understandable, right? Freedom, domesticity. There was a lot of love between us. And the day before he was due to go on his travels for 6 months, he came back home late. I'd cooked dinner. And he had a red mark on his neck. And I looked at it and I was like, "What's that mark on your neck?" And he said, "Oh, it's just where my bag was chafing from holding it." And, I swallowed that and I believed it. But actually, on some level, this is how unconscious I still was. On some level, I knew it was a love bite. He never said anything about it. I never said anything about it. And he left the next day. But on some level, deep down in my gut, in my womb, I knew that he had betrayed me, that he'd had sex with somebody else. We didn't talk about it, and to cut a long story short, 6 months later, that relationship ended, and I was devastated, absolutely devastated. So I share this again from a very vulnerable place, just to illustrate how, what comes around goes around. And so I had the high of moving to London, flourishing with my business, having this ecstatic, joyful, adventurous sex life. I found that bliss, but it didn't come without its consequences. And then I got to feel the pain of betrayal. I got to feel the pain of the ending of a relationship with someone I really loved and actually had wanted to spend the rest of my life with, and actually had begun to feel I would like to have children with. So there you go. It comes back full circle. I wonder if from what I've shared, anything resonates for you, anything has gotten triggered for you. You know, I'm touching into themes that are archetypal, that are big, that are there in our collective consciousness, that are there in our behaviors, that we've either experienced or witnessed, you know, in our childhood, in our teenage years, in our adult years. So, you know I'm touching upon these themes and these feelings that are there with us, for all of us in some way. So just bringing love and compassion to that, again, in myself, for myself, and for anyone watching who is affected, touched, moved, triggered, just bringing compassion to that. I find that it's really important to keep the heart open and allow ourselves to feel, rather than to try and repress and shut down if a feeling is coming up, to let yourself feel it, because that is part of the healing movement. I guess my wish now from this place is for myself and all others to walk through life with honesty, with transparency, with self-awareness around what is alive for us, what is true for us, what is real for us, even when it's painful, even when we're scared. In fact, most importantly, when we're scared, when we feel really afraid of the response that our partner is going to have, that's the most important moment for telling the truth. When we feel that fear of the consequence, or that fear of rejection, or that fear of judgment, or that guilt, or that shame, that's when it's most important to speak our truth. And yes, again, I've learned that it's not easy, and it takes time to learn to be connected in with ourselves sufficiently to be able to articulate the truth, rather than to project and blame or make somebody else responsible for what we're feeling. So that does take learning. And two, to have the skills to communicate in a clear, transparent, compassionate, heart-centered way. It's not something we're born knowing, it's not something we're taught. But again, for me, that's been part of the path, and that is why the tantric path is so important for me, along with the skills in conscious relating and authentic relationship that I've had to learn. Tantra, ladies and gentlemen, is not all about the pursuit of the best sex in the world. It's actually a very conscious, sacred path of awakening to our true nature. And we do that by acknowledging all parts of ourselves, particularly all these hidden parts that I've been speaking about, that I felt so ashamed and guilty about for so long. It's about seeing all of that, witnessing all of that, feeling all of that, so that it can be integrated and brought home. And the more we do that, the less likely it is that we continue to act from the shadow place. So that's where I'm going to end today. It's been pretty deep. I feel like I've gone pretty deep. So just want to mention, if you want to, the book, Rapture, A Guide to Sexual and Spiritual Awakening for Women, it's going to be on sale on October the 9th. And my book launch event is going to be happening in the Facebook group, the Rapture Book Launch Group. Come and join us. And then the course that goes along with the book, 5 months, deep diving, ladies, starts on October the 28th. We would move through all of this kind of stuff together as a group so that you can heal, so that you can release, so that you can become more self-aware and begin to move through life using your sexual energy wisely for yourself, for others, for the world. Thank you for watching. Thank you for being here. If anything has come up for you in my sharing that you'd like one-to-one support with, I've got space for probably just 1 or 2 more people to be working with one-to-one right now. So reach out to me, message me, or go to my website, shaktisundari.com. And then tomorrow's sharing, tomorrow's live, the final one for this week, because I'm taking a break over the weekends, is all about sex and motherhood. A really big topic, really relevant for so many. So again, thank you for being here. Loads of love, compassion to all your hearts and my heart, and I'll see you tomorrow. Namaste.